Hi, everyone. It looks like we have a solid number of attendees across the retail and CPG space, so excited to speak to you all today. We'll be covering shopper behavior on Amazon, specifically what brands need to know. I'm very, very excited to get into it, but before I do that, my name is Jamie Drayton, and I work on our shopper intelligence team here at Similarweb. I'll explain who we are and kind of what we're doing in the space in a minute. But basically, I lead our e-commerce consulting here. So my role is really to talk to a lot of clients or prospective clients, like everyone on this call, about what their Amazon business, what the opportunities are within their Amazon business, what we're seeing in terms of share of sales and also shopper behavior. And then what are those next big areas that you're really looking at in terms of getting data on and solving for these kind of new problems that are constantly coming up. So thank you all for joining. I have a history of working in the e-commerce data space, as I'm sure a lot of you do on this call right now. So excited to cover everything that we'll go through today. You'll see when we go through the agenda that we have a Q&A at the end, but please feel free to ask questions throughout. And yeah, look forward to kind of diving in and answering everyone's questions. Perfect. So in terms of what we'll cover today, we'll stop with an overview of what shopper intelligence is, how we kind of sit within Similarweb and what this data can really do for you. Then we'll kind of shift to what these insights look like. So sales, that's kind of brass tacks. You've probably seen this data before, but really the behavioral side is what I'm most excited about. I think I'll probably say that statement a lot today of how excited I am about the behavioral side, because it really is a differentiator in the space. From there, we'll move on to a live demo. So instead of just kind of showing you how I've put these insights together for a presentation, I really want to make it clear how easy it is to find these insights on your own. So what you'll be seeing is our customer-facing tool. Very straightforward. I think a nice UI is what we've been hearing as general feedback. So excited to kind of move there. And then, as I said, the Q&A will really be focused at the end. But again, as questions come up throughout, feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll make sure we leave about 5 or 10 minutes at the end to cover all those questions. So to dive in, the two main solutions that we're talking about are the entire e-commerce ecosystem from this CPG perspective. So the way that we really think about this is broken down into two main sections. The first would be your D2C site, so your own site, and the second would be marketplaces. So the Walmarts and Amazons, how you sell and behave on those marketplaces. On the D2C side, we have a few examples here of those major use cases that we cover. The first would be D2C benchmarking. So comparing whatever your brand's .com site is to a snacks.com and all those major competitors in your space. The next would be marketing channel analysis. So this is really thinking about every single way that someone enters a site, both your site and competitor sites. So what does the paid search, what does the organic search, display ad traffic, affiliate traffic, what does that look like across all of these different sites? Where's that traffic coming from? How can you optimize across each of those channels and make sure that you're really on par with the industry, or actually kind of taking that next step? The next would be Google keyword strategy. So I kind of touched on that in marketing channels, right? But when we think about, okay, what does this organic and paid search traffic look like? We think about it in terms of swim lane technology or terminology a lot of the time, right? So on the paid search side, when I'm thinking about a swim lane, it's how do I make sure that I'm not bidding on a keyword just to end up sending someone to a marketplace like Amazon as the next step, right? Paying twice for that traffic. So that's a big use case that we talk about. And then the last would be audience insights. So understanding what those interests are of your consumer base, what's the overlap, the retention, those demographics of these consumers. The other piece that we cover is marketplaces. So today we'll be talking a lot about Amazon. This is really the first big site that we've built this out for. And what you'll see is that the base level that we're covering is what is this marketplace performance like for you and your competitors. So understanding not just how your brand performs, or maybe the couple brands and SKUs like you, which is the data that you see a lot, but actually what does that whole category look like? Who are those new and up and coming players that you should learn from? And then how do you continuously benchmark against your biggest competitors to make sure that you're kind of staying on top of that marketplace performance? And I think a big piece of that kind of transitions well into Amazon point of sale data. So again, I think this is kind of brass tacks for the conversation that we're having today. You see the ability to track those brand and category level performances, and we'll cover what that looks like across a few different categories. But I think, and again, this is the part that I get so excited about, is actually Amazon consumer behavior. So I think we often think about a lot of these online marketplaces as a bit of a black box, right? There's some information that's clear. We've gotten to the point with Amazon where point of sale data is out there. I know that everyone on this call has seen some type of Amazon point of sale data, but the big missing piece is, what does that behavior actually look like for a consumer? So what is their loyalty to a certain brand or category? How are they cross shopping with your brand and competitor brands? What does shopper overlap look like between Amazon and other sites that people are making purchases on? So we'll spend a lot of time going through examples of that today. And then finally, Amazon search optimization is a big piece as well. So when you're thinking about that kind of holistic view of your search strategy, there of course is the D2C piece where there's that Google keyword strategy, and then the other piece is Amazon. And I think there's a really good way to tie in those two strategies together, and we'll explain what that looks like on Amazon and what some of the opportunities are. So as I said, right, those are the two main areas of D2C versus marketplaces. When I think about D2C sites, that's really digital research intelligence and digital marketing intelligence from Similarweb. So if there is interest there, of course, we'd be happy to follow up and talk about that. But the real piece that I want to focus on today is shopper intelligence. So actually understanding what's going on within a marketplace. Now, before I jump into all the data, I think it's important to really cover off on what our methodology is, because it is a really big piece of what makes us unique. So when we think about what a lot of players in this space are doing is scraping bestseller rank and inventory levels, and then mixing that with a little bit of first party data to spit out what this view on a retailer like Amazon looks like, right? The shortcomings of that is that there's a high potential for data outages. Accuracy can sometimes be put in question of, okay, how much are we actually understanding our competitor brand versus I'm just seeing my own data here, and then stability. So I think the big piece that we're doing, yes, we do all those elements that I just talked about, but we also have these other elements of a consumer panel and then direct shopper accounts. And what that means is that this data set is very stable. Whenever anyone shares data directly with us, you're never going to see that data kind of spit back out to you. It's only used to improve our machine learning predictive algorithm. So what that means is that we've already gotten very close to what reality looks like. We're very excited to have the data methodology discussion whenever you want, because it's something that we really pride ourselves on. And what you're going to see is that we're very close on the category level. And then if there is any of that data sharing, it's only improving what we already have. It's not this element that is necessary in order to show you anything. And then, so that's kind of the understanding of the space that we all live in right now. What all of these different data sources also allow for us to show you is shopper behavior. So as I said, very excited about that piece, but because of that consumer panel, because of all these different elements that we have, we can actually understand what that behavior looks like. And I'll show a lot of examples of that today. Great. So in terms of what questions can we answer, and I think this is probably a very short list. We've been having a lot of conversations, and we'll be talking through what this data shows, and new ideas will come up that I haven't even thought of before. So kind of excited to see where you think this data can kind of take you to. But the big groups that we want to talk about are which Amazon categories are growing the fastest. We'll be looking at an overall level, but I'll explain how we can get into a much deeper subcategory level as well. We'll also look at which brands are winning, and then how much of their consumer base is really being cannibalized by competition. And what I mean by that, right, is, okay, if we look at that shopper behavior, if we look at the search terms that are being captured by a competitor instead of you, how can we understand where you really just need to up the game, whether it's a paid search strategy or PDP optimization, anything like that, but understanding what that behavior is between you and your competitive set. Another big piece, so does search interest translate into product views and conversions? We see a lot of different strategies across competitors, across categories, but I'll cover on a few examples of kind of where that best place to sit is in terms of what are the terms that you should be targeting, and how do you lead that to a conversion. And then a big piece, so again, getting into the shopper behavior side, but how strong is that loyalty loop? And is the share of subscribe and save purchases actually increasing? So when you think about what is the goal of your marketplace business, is it to push someone towards subscribe and save? Are you trying to get that kind of first purchase so they understand your brand, right? There are a lot of different ways to think about what success is on these marketplaces. And I think you'll see that a lot of this data kind of gives you that base level of okay, where do I sit right now, and then where should I go from here. So jumping right into what we see as these fastest categories, and all the data that I'm talking about right now is from Shopper Intelligence, which is when I go through it, right, we're looking at the entire Amazon landscape. So this is desktop, mobile web, and app, all purchases, all behavior that's happening on Amazon, and then across a few different geographies. So I have a .com example here, but then also a .co.uk example for the UK side. So in the US, we see that the fastest growing Amazon categories are, and this is by scale as well, right? So of these top level categories, we see the grocery is the largest. It also had the largest growth. So up 64% year over year in this uh, time to date of January through June of 2021 versus 2020. Right. And I think that really speaks to one of the categories that Amazon is really doubling down on, but also this shift in what consumers are willing to purchase online. So if you look at the UK side, it's up a much more dramatic percentage and also the largest category. So grocery is up 224% year over year in terms of unit sales. And it speaks to this behavior that I think really came out and started to kind of take charge during the pandemic. I think in the US versus a lot of other geographies, we were very hesitant about purchasing our groceries online. And we see that behavior is shifting. And Amazon is a great example of how this biggest category is still seeing the fastest growth. What we also see is a kind of across all these major categories, strong growth across the board. So in the US, growth was about 40-45%. In the UK, it was higher. I think the average was somewhere around 70% across these top categories. And it's a lot of the big players that you would expect. So grocery, of course, is the largest. Home and kitchen is large. Clothing, shoes, and jewelry. But kind of what this shows is the acceleration of Amazon, but also this is just top level. And I think if you are at any of these different CPG clients where you play in one of these categories, what you really care about is the subcategories within these. And we have that data is available as well. Something that you'll also kind of notice before I go to the next piece, you'll see on the US side that the category for clothing is clothing, shoes, and jewelry, whereas on the UK side, it's clothing specifically, right? And the reason for that is that all of our categories and everything that we look at is based off of Amazon's taxonomy. You do have the ability to kind of create your own group, but we base everything off of Amazon's taxonomy. So how it's displayed on that site in that geography is how we're sharing it with you here. The next piece that I want to show is kind of what these landscape views look like within a specific category. So grocery as the overall bucket, I double clicked into beverages for both the US and UK. And what we immediately see is how these top brands play out in terms of product views and conversion rates. So that whole that landscape understanding. And just to kind of think about, okay, well, what does this data actually mean? I see a brand like Starbucks, which is doing a great job of getting product views, right? The understanding and brand awareness of Starbucks is very high, and they're doing a great job of bringing people to their pages. Their conversion rates are actually lower than best in class. And the reason for that is kind of the difference in how people are shopping for that specific product. So Whole Foods Market, you see a conversion rate above 100%, right? The way we're measuring conversion is when someone is landing on a product detail page and then adding to cart. So above 100%, this is showing that there's this large number of consumers that are viewing the product, but they're also just adding directly to cart from a results page. So very strong performance there, and kind of that relationship between product views and conversion rate, I think speaks to a lot of, okay, what should our search strategy be here? and kind of how do we position ourselves against some of these top keywords that are driving people to purchase a different major brand. On the UK side, a similar relationship in terms of kind of these big brands getting a high number of product views, and then we see some of these other players with that higher conversion rate, but not as high as the US. So Lavazza in the beverage space, for example, does a great job of getting those product views. They have one of the highest in terms of all of these brands, but their conversion rate is much lower to a big player like Pepsi. And I think, again, right, this is probably, okay, this is great, good to know about beverages in general, but when we get to the demo, I'll show how specific we can get in terms of this kind of segmenting out of like, okay, I've seen beverages, now I want to just look at sparkling water, or I just want to look at coffee and tea. The next big piece is actually understanding what is the subscribe and save behavior on these category and brand levels. So this is something that we recently rolled out, the ability to see all conversions by subscribe and save versus one-time purchases, that we're very excited about, because in these categories where SNS is a big share, I think, again, it's kind of been this black box of like, okay, how am I doing versus the overall category, or even how am I doing can sometimes be this big question mark. So excited to roll this out. And I just have the same example here of the category and brand level. So at the category level, we see that in June, subscribe and save represented almost 39% of all purchases in the beverage category. I'd say that's a pretty strong number in terms of categories across Amazon. We see kind of like dog food, for example, pet food is a very high subscribe and save category, but definitely 39% is a very strong activity from consumers of actually subscribing and saving. The other thing to note is how dramatically this share has gone up over time. So consumers, I think, across the board have become more and more comfortable with subscribe and save as a motion or something that they kind of spend behind. We see across most of these major categories that when we go back to January of 2020, the relationship that we see is sales have overall increased, and that the share of those sales that are subscribe and save has also increased. I think an interesting point is whether or not we've hit that plateau. And I really think that that is going to vary category by category. So for some of these, there still is a lot of runway left for upping your subscribe and save share. But for others, you're really at saturation of, okay, I've probably done everything I can with my existing customer base. And if I want to grow my sales number anymore, I really need to focus on getting new customers in and then trying to convert them to subscribe and save. So kind of comparing of, okay, how do we actually use this data? I think this is a good example of how I would do it on a brand versus category level. So what we see right here is the overall subscribe and save share for beverages, 39%. We can then double click into what does Starbucks' share look like. And what we see is that they have a much higher share of subscribe and save purchases. So in June, it actually leveled out. In May, I think it was a bit more subscribe and save, about 51%. Now it's a pretty even split between subscribe and save and one-time purchases. But when I see this, I would say, okay, if I were a competitor of Starbucks in the beverage space, what I care about is doing everything that I can to get my consumers towards an equal subscribe and save share that Starbucks has, right? So then all of a sudden, instead of like, okay, I don't even know how many sales I have from subscribe and save, there's now this very clear goal that you can set for the business of, we know that the top brand in the beverage category is doing 50% on subscribe and save. Let's do everything we can to kind of encourage that repeat customer and see if we can push them towards subscribe and save, because it is such a strong motion for one of our biggest competitors. Great. And then I just wanted to quickly cover some of the Prime Day insights to speak to, okay, how can we kind of use this data as big holidays are coming up, and what are some of the big things that we're seeing? So in terms of product views and conversion rates, so a similar chart to what I was showing before that we have at the category level, we really see that there were three main areas that really took hold on Prime Day. And the first that I'd speak to is headliners, which is that really high product view, but lower conversion rate. So this is like the big players like electronics, home and kitchen, clothing, shoes, and jewelry that were really highly publicized discounts. and were kind of these target areas of expansion, and it was all about the deal. So maybe someone was holding off on making that TV purchase for Prime Day because they knew that there was going to be this big deal, and that's what led to such high product views. But the actual conversion rate, right? People are kind of much more hesitant to purchase a TV versus maybe a food item or a gift card. It wasn't nearly as high. The next area would be table stakes. So this is what we think of as this high loyalty and frequency, but then there's also this really big reach and large assortment of all the different products offered. And that's where we think about pet supplies, health and household, beauty and personal care, right? And it's definitely a strong number of product views, but they really stuck out on Prime Day because they did have higher conversion rates than a lot of the players that you see in gray below. And then the finally are kind of these investments of their low return on investment. They're kind of low margin products like grocery and gourmet food, the grocery category in the US, and gift cards. But it's this investment in a long-term relationship with the consumer. And this did a very good job, not nearly as many product views, but such high conversion rate that there was very strong performance on the two-day Prime Day event. And then the last piece that I want to cover is kind of did Amazon widen its audience? So when we think about the share of kind of new customers that make up a purchase, it's a good way to think about, okay, is this kind of net new, or were we just kind of giving deals to the consumers that we already have? And here we have all those different categories kind of picked out. And I think by category, we get this really strong sense of whether or not this was a success in widening its audience. So gift cards, an example we called out before, a lot of new customers here too. So kind of bringing people into that Amazon ecosystem, they're converting on those items. Great. So now I want to shift over to shopper intelligence, and I'm going to go through a category example. I'll make sure I show everything in the platform, but I think before I even jump into this, right, I want to make it clear that this is that this can be replicated across any category, any brand on Amazon. So lots of opportunity to kind of dig into your specific area of interest. Happy to have follow-ups afterwards if you kind of want to learn more about your specific category. But I just wanted to start off with something general so we see everything that can be done. So when you first enter Shopper Intelligence, what you'll see is that we have the overview of Amazon performance and a lot of metrics that you're probably very comfortable with. So units sold, revenue, what are these product views, and then actual conversion rate on the overall site. And for this example, I'll stick with the US, but I would love to just kind of quickly pop over and show UK. So same relationship, right? And we have this for 7 different geographies. The US, UK, Italy, France, Germany, Japan, and Canada, right? So lots of different opportunities of way to split this data depending on your geography. But as I said, I'll kind of start with the US here. So again, this is likely data that you've seen before, right, of all these major metrics across Amazon. And what we do is we have those same 4 metrics that are kind of really the staple of what we're thinking about across all of Amazon, the category level, and then the brand level. So when I think about the category level performance, what you'll see is that everything, again, is organized by Amazon's taxonomy. So when we're thinking about appliances, for example, we have the parts and accessories group within that. We also have the dryer parts and accessories, and then within that, replacement parts, right? So the kind of niche level that we're able to get to, I think is definitely helpful depending on your category, right? If you're segmented a lot of different ways, it's good to think about, okay, not only how is my brand performing, but how is this really niche category performing? Am I offering every type of item that consumers want in this category? Is there somewhere I should be playing that I'm not? How are the biggest players in those kind of smaller categories winning? So for today's example, I wanted to talk about dog food, which is something that I know more about now than I thought I ever would, especially since I don't own a dog. But what we'll see is that within the pet supplies categories, there are all these very specific dog categories. But what you'll see is that we have food. We can go deeper in terms of dry, wet, canned, right? But for this, we'll just look at the overall section of the dog food category. So as I said before, we have these same metrics. As you see, right, versus Amazon, it's a very high converting category. So it's a consumer that has a very high intention of purchase, and has potentially already done their research, right? But that 34% is very high for a category. But what I also want to show here is that when we get into this category level, we can actually see that split out of 1P versus 3P sellers. So when you're thinking about, okay, at the brand level, am I doing a good enough job of kind of making sure that I'm the one that's selling these products, and we don't have this kind of supply chain issue of a lot of our items kind of just being leaked and sold through 3P, right? I think that's a big question mark for a lot of different brands. And we're able to see at that category and then at that brand level, what is that split of actually 1P and 3P sales. What you'll also see is a similar view, and I'll make this a little bit larger, to what we had before. But for this competitive landscape, we can see the product views and conversion rate of all of the major players in the dog food category, right? We also have this broken out by units sold, revenue, and product views for major brands. So when you first step into the platform, you get an immediate sense of, okay, if I am Purina Pro Plan, where do I sit in terms of this overall category in terms of those major metrics that I care about? So units sold, revenue, and then how many views am I actually driving to my pages? At the product level, we can get to what does that look like over time. So again, all these major metrics, units sold, revenue, product views for a specific ASIN, the brand that belongs to. Again, metrics you've likely seen before of the reviews count and then the rating count as well. So this is kind of the first place where I think this is going to be very different than anything you've seen. It gets me very, very excited because it is so different in the Amazon space. But at this category level, we can actually see the loyalty and retention at a category and brand level. So the first thing that we're looking at is actual purchase frequency for the category. So in terms of all unique customers, we can see the share of one-time customers that make up those customers, transactions, and then actual revenue. So what this says to me is that there is this large share of unique customers, 63%, but they're only converting, they're converting less than their fair share of actual transactions and revenue. So 63% of the pie is only converting about 34% of all transactions. Whereas this loyalist, so 2 to 4 transactions, and especially the fanatic group, is a big player in the space in terms of who's contributing to overall sales. So in the dog food category, 5.6% of the shoppers are making up 20% of the revenue because they're purchasing 5 or more times. What we can also see is the split out between new versus returning customers. So what does this look like in terms of how many people are coming back to the category? So we see 40%, and I'll kind of ask that we hold that number in the back of our head. So when I switch to a brand example, we can think about how we action that. But we see that 40% of the customers are new to the category, and we see what does that repeat purchase behavior look like. So those days since last purchase, 20% are purchasing in that 1 month time period, but makes sense in the dog food category. It's really that 31 to 90 days, so like 1 to 3 months where consumers are making that next purchase of dog food. And then, as I said before, we have these subscribe and save metrics for the category and brand level. So when I look at what is the split out of subscribe and save versus one-time purchases in dog food, we see that this is actually one of the highest categories across all of Amazon. So 56% of all purchases are through subscribe and save, right? And if we think back to that beverage example, I think beverages was around 38%, right? Starbucks was 50%, which was best in class. Now we're looking at a different category and we see just how big this range is. So 56% of all purchases are subscribe and save. I think those are the two numbers that I think are important to remember on this view. 40% of are new customers in the dog food space, and then 56% are subscribe and save. And the reason that I think that's so important is because we can look at this exact same set of metrics across every brand that plays in this category. So if I switch over to loyalty and retention by brand, I'll look at a pet food or a dog food example. And what we can see is the share of same metrics we saw before, right? Who is this customer base that's contributing to overall purchases? We can see the share of new versus returning customers. So 50%, so a much larger share of new customers, right? I think especially in the dog food space, there's this big push to get people towards that return behavior. So when I look at this number, I say, okay, this is actually an opportunity for Blue Buffalo, because you really want to get this to a higher returning rate, because you want to be at parity with the category, which would be best in class. If someone's coming back to the category, and not only are they coming back there, but they're repurchasing your brand. And then when we look at subscribe and save, we see that Blue Buffalo is actually kind of above the category. So I'd say definitely best in class. We can compare this to other brands to make sure. But when I see subscribe and save versus one-time purchases, it's 64% of all of these purchases are happening on subscribe and save. So a greater share than the overall category, and does speak to how Blue Buffalo has done a good job here of kind of pushing people towards subscribe and save, and definitely an opportunity if you're a different brand in the pet space. And as an example, right, I just want to quickly show how we can just immediately pull this up across different brands. We can see what that share is across someone like a Purina Pro plan. So we see a similar percentage, about 64% are subscribe and save, but then also what does that shift look like over time? So I think when we trend this out, we can say, okay, we know that kind of best in class for us is about 53%. And then the bar that you're trying to hit on a monthly basis is trying to keep that share high for subscribe and save, or at least keep the number of subscribe and save purchases the same, and try to up those one-time purchases to bring more people in. Great. So now flipping back to this brand side, I don't want to skip over this. I want to make sure we're kind of covering the same thing on category and brand. So if I go to Blue Buffalo, we see, again, those same four metrics, the share of 1P versus 3P. This is a very strong story for Blue Buffalo, that there's such a high, or there is a very high majority of sales that are 1P, 98%. So there's not too much overlap there. Whereas I just want to show an example that would probably be very different. We think about a clothing player like Under Armour, and we split out 1P versus 3P, it's a much higher share of 3P sales. So 11% for Under Armour, right? And I think that's a really big difference that's important to think about of, okay, how am I doing in my category and against my category? So I'll flip back to Blue Buffalo to kind of keep talking through that example. And you'll see, right, same metrics we talked about: conversion rate, revenue, product views. But what we can actually see is, what does that performance look like by all of the different categories within Amazon? So under pet supplies, we see that about 2/3 is on the dog foods, on the dog side versus the cat side. Within dogs, we see the breakout of food and treats. So Blue Buffalo, compared to a lot of the major brands, actually has a pretty strong treats business. I think that it can be difficult for some of these big brands to play in the treat space, because it's kind of this different need state for the consumer. But strong performance there. And then within each of these categories, we can see, okay, what is the share of wet versus dry dog food? And what does that look like? So kind of a little bit heavier in the dry food than wet, but definitely a pretty substantial wet food business as well. And then, as I said before, we were looking at the category level. We can now see at just the brand level, what does SKU level performance look like over time across these major units. So units sold, revenue, and product views. The next piece that I really want to make sure we cover on is the cross shopping. So now we're really getting deeper and deeper into this behavioral side of what we can see on Amazon. That is probably kind of the first time that you're seeing metrics like this. So when we look at cross shopping for a brand, we can see not just at the brand level, but we can limit it by all of those different Amazon categories that we were looking at. So if I just limit this to dog food, I can see that of shoppers that visited Hill Science Diet, 10% of all of those shoppers are also visiting Blue Buffalo. Whereas of all the shoppers that visit Blue Buffalo, a slightly smaller number, 9.75%, are also visiting Hill Science Diet. And I think the kind of blaring opportunity that becomes clear here when we're looking at this cross shop between categories is, okay, maybe I knew that all of these were kind of major players that I was worried about, but when we look at the kind of long tail, it could say, okay, Rachel Ray Nutrition, we really only think about 4 other brands in this space. We're not even thinking about Rachel Ray, but we have this big share of shoppers that is also visiting Rachel Ray pieces. So if I think about how do I capture that additional shopper, I should really look at the keywords and the behavior of Rachel Ray Nutrish in order to make sure that I'm getting those shoppers on board and that they're converting on my page instead of Rachel Ray. So you can kind of think about that across any category, but I think about like the FMCG space in general. And maybe if you're like a sparkling water player, as an example, right? There's this long tail of brands that you may not be thinking about as top of mind, and they may be working on a totally different keyword strategy than what you're currently thinking about even exists for your category. And I'll use that as an example to kind of switch over to the on-site search piece. So if you're kind of wondering what Blue Buffalo is doing, you can see the on-site search by brand and then by category that you care about. So what sticks out here is the degree of paid versus organic clicks. I think when I'm kind of having conversations with CPG players, they care a lot about that paid clicks number because it actually shows the level of investment that their competitors have. But also a big or a big finding has been the share of branded versus non-branded search that's making someone arrive on a Blue Buffalo page. So what this is telling me is that 64.6% of all searches that land on a Blue Buffalo page are branded for Blue Buffalo, meaning someone searches Blue Buffalo, they land on a page 64.6% of the time. What this is also telling me is that 8.1% of the time, consumers are searching for a different brand like Purina Pro Plan, but actually landing on a Blue Buffalo page. So that's really it's a good conquesting number of how good a job is a brand doing of capturing these clicks. But when someone is kind of searching for a different brand and has this different brand in mind, but also a good benchmark of how is offline spend, how are all of these other different channels contributing to the behavior that I'm seeing on likely our biggest marketplace, which is Amazon. What we can also see is the actual keywords that are driving people to these specific brands or specific categories. So this is where we have a lot of conversations with search teams of kind of understanding, okay, I get that a lot of these are branded, but when I get into the long tail or some of these generic keywords of like dog food wet, I can actually see the share that Blue Buffalo is capturing, the amount that they're converting that keyword on, and then the amount that a competitor is converting that keyword on. So I think that the big opportunity that we see is, okay, you know that you're capturing the dog food wet category, but let's say as an example, your conversion rate was much lower than the competitive set that's converting that keyword. That's a kind of a good opportunity to maybe start a paid search campaign or make sure that you're optimized on the organic search side for maybe these larger items that can kind of match that bigger dollar price that people are converting on a competitor, right? Because you're kind of leaving money on the table if you're converting at a lower rate than these than your major competitors. But continuing with that example, right, if we're thinking about dog food wet, we see this share that Blue Buffalo has, but we can also click in and understand what is the share out of all different players. So we see for a very specific keyword, what is the search volume, the actual clicks, so kind of the conversion, right, of like the volume versus actually people that are clicking on a specific PDP after, and then the amount of paid clicks that are happening as well. But then we can see, okay, so we have that split out of organic versus paid. We can see which brands are winning and by how much they're winning. So Caesar, for example, is capturing almost 19% of all of the dog food wet specific traffic. Blue Buffalo is 12%, and then this long tail. So a big use case here is we'll be talking to a search team and they'll say, okay, we're starting a pretty niche search campaign where we really want to make sure that we're capturing all vet related searches. Or maybe on the sparkling water side, we see that there's a big opportunity with the raspberry flavor. Like we know that from a search perspective, we think we're losing there, but we're not sure across all these different flavors. You can actually see of this behavior that's driving to the category, click into each of those keywords and say, okay, this is something that we should be getting, and we're currently not doing it. And then finally, you see what the actual search results look like for that keyword and whether it's sponsored or not. And we have that same performance over time of these SKUs that are capturing that keyword. There are two last pieces that I want to touch on, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So the first piece would be basket analysis. So when we think about what this basket mix looks like, we can actually see for a brand, what is the split out of how many brands are purchased in that basket. So 18.5% just has Blue Buffalo in their basket. We see that the majority, 53% of all baskets, actually have 4 more brands in their basket when they're purchasing Blue Buffalo. And then we can see the frequency of other items that are purchased with Blue Buffalo, right? So thinking about, okay, what is our kind of overlap with like greenies? Is that kind of white space for us right now, or is this a major competitor, right? There's that kind of opportunity to potentially package those together, right, or some type of promotion, but also just understanding, okay, we need to make sure that we're driving more overlap with our kind of a treats brand or whatever it is, so that we can actually displace greenies, who's capturing a lot of our traffic. And then the last piece that I want to cover on is actual shopper overlap. So it's great to see everything that's happening on the Amazon platform, but I think what's so powerful about the data that we're looking at is that at a category level and then at even a brand level, we can see what that overlap is with other sites. So what this is saying is that this is of everyone that visited the Amazon domain and the dog food category specifically, what percentage of those visitors also visited Chewy.com? So when you're thinking about your overall marketplace strategy of how am I performing or how much emphasis am I putting on converting someone on Amazon, you can actually see, okay, well, I know 27% of these shoppers are also going to Chewy. Maybe it's actually a better opportunity to try to convert them there, or I should be looking at a competitor brand who's looking at both, and maybe I kind of try to divert that consumer at some point of kind of making sure that they're at least aware of your product. Great. So that was a lot of information, right? I think the single category example is kind of the way that we have to go about doing this, because there's so much that we can cover. But again, if there are any specific examples that you would like us to cover, we'd be happy to set up some time, take you through like what your category looks like. But with that, I'd love to open it up for the last 14 minutes to any questions that we have. Okay, so the first question is, do we get this Amazon analysis as part of basic licensing, or is it a separate offering? Shopper analysis is a separate offering from the traditional Similarweb, right? I think when we're kind of talking to that different methodology and the product that we're creating, this was really created with the retail and CPG customer in mind. So it is this standalone piece that does offer all of this information. But if you're already a customer of Similarweb, right, I think your account manager can sort that out as well to kind of go through if there's a demo process or anything like that, to make sure you get as much value as possible. Cool. The next question is, can we see this for a different category as an example? Right. So I think something that I didn't cover off on, we were kind of thinking about like the CPG space. I want to show a quick example with athletic apparel. So when we look at the sports, or here, I'll go through from the brand perspective. So if I'm looking at Adidas performance on the overall category, right, we can see what categories they play in. So specifically within clothing, shoes, and jewelry, how much is men's, how much is shoes. But then as we get more and more niche, we can actually identify categories that are growing very quickly. So a category that we singled out as having very strong performance was actually the sports bras category. So when we look at the last 12 months, this category had very, very strong performance. And this is actually a conversation that we've been having of how do you use insights like this to think to make sure that you're covering all relevant items that consumers are searching for. So you can see some of these like who is the biggest player, how are people doing within sports bras. But when we look at on-site search, a big finding here was high impact. So when I looked at high impact in the last 6 months, there were, I think, over 2.4 million searches just for high impact, right? So those are kind of two pieces that you can do with that. One is influencing the brand strategy or the product line strategy of what products you create. But then the other is if your product is already kind of has that high impact quality, make sure that you're making that very clear on your product detail pages because you know that the intent is there. So examples like that, right? It's these kind of small tweaks that can be made where all of a sudden you have this share that you're capturing from 2.4 million clicks that are converting at an average of 7%, right? It's this big opportunity for you to get a lot more sales on products that you're already selling. The next question is, will there be a webinar once this is launched? We have officially launched, I believe. So very, very exciting that we have Shopper Intelligence live. But if there are any specific questions or again, you want to talk about your brand, your category, we're more than happy to set up a separate call with whoever is interested to kind of walk through what we're seeing. Perfect. I'll give it one more minute if any other questions come in, but I appreciate everyone's time today. I hope that this was insightful. I think it's super exciting on our end that we're able to get at the shopper behavior piece. And if you have any ideas of, oh, I wish I could see this, or this is actually how I think I would use the data, we would be very happy to have that conversation. Oh, and there was a follow-up. Will we have a different webinar once Walmart.com is launched? Yes, absolutely. We're not there yet. I think our R&D team is working hard to make it happen, but we don't have a firm date on when that's coming. But we will absolutely make that very, very clear once we get there. Perfect. Well, if there are no more questions, I appreciate everyone's time today. And again, please feel free to follow up if you have any questions. My email is jamie.drayton@Similarweb, and I look forward to speaking with all of you. Thank you.